All right, as we finish up this Founding Fathers unit, I want to talk today about what I think is one of the coolest stories in American history, and it's the Lewis and Clark expedition. Lewis and Clark has a special connection to our area, right? When we go down to Clarksville, we can shop or eat on the Lewis and Clark Parkway. If you go to the bridge on the east end of Louisville, it is the Lewis and Clark Bridge. And that is because down at the Falls of the Ohio is where Lewis and Clark are going to start this journey. There's a statue down there of the two of them shaking hands. Every year they have what's called the handshake celebration down there, commemorating when these two guys are going to leave. So let's look and see what the big deal is with the Lewis and Clark expedition. It's 1803. In the United States, if you can take a look at the map that I've got there for you, is made up of everything pink. But most people are living right there in kind of the darker pink color. I would venture a guess to say maybe that's salmon, but I'm a dude, so it looks pink to me. It's like dark pink. There are 5 million people that live in the United States. It's actually less than the population of the state of Indiana today, to give you an idea. Most people live within 20 miles of the ocean. And that makes sense because you don't have a great system of roads at this time. And so a lot of goods travel by ship. And if you needed, um, food, clothing, equipment, things like that, you had to be near somewhere where you were going to be able to get that. So most of the stuff west of the Appalachian Mountains is still territory that's inhabited by Native Americans. Our own state of Indiana, of course, doesn't exist yet, and the folks that are in our area are Native American tribes. And so most people are going to live their lives, like I said, within 20 miles of the Atlantic Ocean or some body of water that's feeding off of the Atlantic. And most people aren't going to travel more than 10 or 15 miles away from their home during their entire lives, just because um, of how difficult travel was. President at the time is a guy named Thomas Jefferson. Remember, we talked about him. And Thomas Jefferson has won the election of 1800, so we're in his first term as President of the United States, and he's going to get kind of a unique opportunity. Turns out that Napoleon is over in Europe fighting against basically everybody because he's Napoleon. And all of those wars are very costly. And so to drum up money at this point in time, the United States gets a signal that he's ready to sell the Louisiana Territory. Now, if you look at that picture I've got there for you, it's a really good picture. It shows you all of this. You're talking the modern day states of Mississippi, Arkansas, Iowa, parts of the Dakotas, all the way out into kind of the Montana, places like that. So this is what is considered the Louisiana Territory. Now the stuff to the west of that is going to be Mexican territory, but this is French territory, and the biggest deal is right there at the bottom is the state of New Orleans, and a very important city that is in that state called New Orleans. And so New Orleans is going to be what Jefferson really wants to purchase. It's a city that sits right at the end of the Mississippi River, so it's kind of a gateway into the Gulf of Mexico. It was a good way to get supplies in. You could actually take them down our own Ohio River, hit south into Mississippi, and then go down to New Orleans, where you catch a boat and go to the coast, go to Europe, however you want wanting to do that. So they go to Jefferson's going to send actually James Monroe over to, who will be, we talked about being president of the United States, is going to send him over to France to try and buy New Orleans. And the idea is it's supposed to spend, he goes to Congress, he's got, $3 to $5 million. You got kind of a budget that you're going to spend on the city of New Orleans. So as he gets over there and starts to negotiate, he figures out that they're not just talking about the city, that he thinks he can get the entire Louisiana territory. And so, without kind of congressional approval, Jefferson gives him permission to make the deal. And so, for $15 million, Jefferson is going to buy the Louisiana Purchase. Now, this is one of those things where, we talked about Jefferson thinking that the federal government had too much power, that he gets elected because he wants control with the states. But it's one of those things that's almost just too good a deal to pass up. So I know what I said before Jefferson's thinking, but yeah, I'm not going to let this one go. If you adjust it to today, right, the number of acres they bought for that money, um, or the number of acres they bought for the money back then, it was 3.8 cents an acre. And this is the breadbasket of America. This is some of the best farmland in the entire country. And he's getting it for less than 4 cents an acre. Land in Scott County today, for an acre of land, you're going to go anywhere from 6 or 7 to 14 or $15,000, depending on where the land is. So he got a really, really good deal. The problem is he's got to come back and tell that to Congress. I imagine that's kind of like a spouse coming home. Maybe the husband goes to buy a TV at Walmart, has this much money he's going to spend on a 50-inch TV, but he sees a new 90-inch TV there that's on sale. Yeah, it's 3 times what the budget was, but it's on sale. And so he's excited. He loads it up in the car, and as he's driving home, he tries to figure out, how am I going to explain this to my wife? But everybody was pretty pumped about the Louisiana Purchase. The only problem is nobody really knew what was out there. And so Jefferson's got to get an expedition together to go. Got a clip here for you from the Blues Brothers.
It's 106 miles to Chicago. We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes. It's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
So I like to put it this way. It's 4,000 miles to the ocean. We got 31 men, $2,500. It's unexplored, but we've got laxatives. Let's talk Lewis and Clark. The group that's going to go out to discover what's going on in this land is a group called the Corps of Discovery. If you notice that word up there, a lot of times it gets mixed up. People want to pronounce it corpse. It's only corpse if it has an E on it. A corpse is a dead body. A corps is a group of people. And so the Corps of Discovery is going to be this group of men that Thomas Jefferson is going to send out to explore the Louisiana Purchase. So Thomas Jefferson is going to send a group of 31 men out to explore the Louisiana Purchase, to see what it is that he's bought. They have got instructions to write down everything they're seeing, send things back, bring things back with them. Jefferson, we talked about, was really interested in nature. Probably would have gone himself if people hadn't been really reluctant to let the president leave for 3 years without knowing where he was at. But was a naturals type of guy, and so he was pumped up to go. So this is going to be a place where no American has gone before. There are going to be Native Americans who are out here. There are going to be French traders, people that had been trapping animals, things like that. But for the most part, this is unexplored country. There are 2 men that are going to lead the expedition. The first is Meriwether Lewis. Meriwether, I think that's a name that needs to make a comeback in today's society. He was Jefferson's secretary, which basically back then meant he was kind of his right-hand man. He was an assistant to Jefferson. He was probably as impressive as Jefferson as a student of botany, science, that sort of thing. And so Jefferson couldn't go. About the best he could do was send Meriwether Lewis out on the trip. Meriwether Lewis, like every other man on the expedition, had one assignment, and that was to keep a journal as he was going out and back, so that they would have a record of what was happening. The interesting thing about Meriwether Lewis is we know today, if he were alive today, he'd probably be diagnosed as having major depression. He had a depressive personality. Really, the only time you see any indication are the days that he doesn't record something in his journal, while he is on the expedition. When he comes back, though, he does, within a couple of years, take his own life, um, and that was chalked up to his mental illness. But on the trip, there's never any indication that he um, wasn't involved, wasn't engaged in what was happening. So he's kind of the brains of the operation. The other guy that's going to go is a guy named Captain William Clark. So this is the Clark of Lewis and Clark. Now, Captain William Clark had a famous brother, George Rogers Clark, who Clark County is named after. Um, George Rogers Clark had gotten a grant of land for his service in the Revolutionary War, and so that's where we get Grant Line Road, because that was the road marking the grant. There's actually a little bit of Clark's grant of land in the very southern part of Scott County. Was originally part of that. Clark was in George Rogers Clark's younger brother William was a military man himself. He is going to be kind of that leader as these guys are going out. If they run into trouble, this is going to be the guy that knows how to get him out. He's also a cartographer, which means he's going to draw a map of where the expedition is exploring. They're going to be sticking to rivers. Mostly they're going to go up the Mississippi and then out west on the Missouri River. And he's drawing a map. And when they came back, it was something crazy. I want to read a great book about these guys. There's one called Undaunted Courage by Stephen Ambrose. That's a really good book, and it's based on those journals all these guys are taking. But it was something like when they came back, he had estimated how far they had gone there and back, and was off by less than 150 miles. And you're talking a 4,000 mile journey, and he's that good at knowing how far they've traveled. His map is used for years following him coming back. Interesting thing about William Clark is he was a slave owner, and his slave, a man named York, is actually going to be part of the crew that's heading out there. Basically, these guys have got to be able to carry everything that they've got. They're going to have what's called a keel boat. I encourage you, if you don't know, take a second and look up what a keel boat looks like. It's got long runways that run down the side, and men would plant long poles into the bottom of the riverbed and then walk those poles as they walk the plank in order to push it up against the current. Now, the idea was obviously you want to turn around before you get to the end of the boat, or you fall in the water, and I'm sure people would make fun of you. But they've got a keel boat. They've got a cannon that they took with them in case they met people, and they did have a little bit of trouble at a couple of different spots. They took with them peace medals, and basically they were these peace medals were metal medallions that had a picture of the United States on one side and a picture of President Jefferson on the other. And as they met these Native Americans, they were supposed to welcome them into the United States and tell them about their great white father, Thomas Jefferson, who was back in Washington, D.C. Actually, one of the only ways they knew Lewis and Clark were alive is because a couple of different times during the course of the journey, Native Americans would show up at the White House with these medals saying they'd met Lewis and Clark, and Lewis and Clark invited representatives from their tribe to come back to Washington, D.C., and so that was one of the ways that they knew. The other thing they had, medicine was not very far advanced in the early 1800s. They had something called Rush's Thunderbolts. Benjamin Rush was one of the founding fathers, had helped to finance the Revolutionary War, and as a doctor, he had perfected a medicine that he called Rush's Thunderbolts. What they were was an extremely powerful laxative. And so it goes to my theory that taking a good poop will pretty much cure anything. Problem is, a lot of stuff you get on the river, things like dysentery, are not good to take laxatives for. If you've already got diarrhea, taking a laxative, not a great idea. But believe it or not, one guy died on the Lewis and Clark expedition there and back, and he died of what people consider today to be appendicitis. So they said he could have been in New York City, and there was nothing they could have done for him. Two of the people that are there, York, you see in the painting in the left-hand side, as York goes out, Native Americans had never seen a black man before. And so if you look at some of what the different tribes were writing about him, they thought he was big medicine. They were impressed by just his physical stature and the color of his skin. The other one is a young lady named Sacagawea, Sacagaway, however you want to pronounce it. She's that chick that Teddy Roosevelt has the hots for in Night at the Museum. If you've seen her, that probably is where it's been. She was, even though she looks a little older in the picture that we've got here, 13-year-old girl when they meet her. She had been kidnapped from her tribe, rescued by a man, a French trader named Jean Baptiste, and had married him. They had a child together. She was pregnant, has the child on the journey. But Lewis and Clark pay them to help guide them out west. And of course, she could speak the language of some of the Native American tribes. So she goes with them as well. She has the distinction of being the second woman to be on American currency. And so in the late 90s, early 2000s, she is put on the dollar coin. So altogether, these guys are going to travel over 4,000 miles out to the ocean and 4,000 miles back. They find 177 new species of plants, 128 new species of animals. These are the first Americans to see grizzly bears. There's a hilarious story in there about them seeing this bear and it's standing up to be like 11 and a half feet tall. They're the first to see prairie dogs. The story of them trying to kind of capture a prairie dog to send back to Washington, D.C. is a funny one too. And so I encourage you, I'll put a video or two up on the YouTube playlist so you can hear some of these things. Ken Burns made a really great documentary about Lewis and Clark, and I'll link that too. It's a little long, not for me. I love this story, but I think it's like 3.5, 4 hours long. So if you're real into it, that may be something to take in as well. They sent these things back, kept them on the lawn of the White House, and so people could come by and see. They had a couple of bear cubs, some of these prairie dogs, so that people could come by and see the things that they'd found. Basically, this movement opens up the western part of the United States. The Louisiana Purchase doubles the size of the United States, and so now all of a sudden, that pioneer spirit that brought some people from Europe to the colonies, now they've got someplace else to go, right? To get away from society, to get away from everything, forge your own destiny. You could start to travel out this way. Lewis and Clark, as they were coming back, decided it would take 10 generations for America to fill up the land that they had explored. The land starts to be filled up in less than 2. People were fascinated by these accounts and wanted to go out and experience this country for themselves. Like I said, one guy left behind, his name is Corporal Floyd. That's where we get Floyd County. Floyd's Knobs are named in his honor. So a lot of local connections to what has gone on with Lewis and Clark. The biggest idea here is the one of manifest destiny. This is one we'll hit a couple of different times, but I think the painting does a really nice job of showing. It was the idea that the United States was God ordained to stretch from ocean to ocean. And so this is Providence leading us out. If you take a zoom in on the picture, you can see Native Americans in Buffalo are being pushed out as settlers, and then wagons, and then trains. Progress is coming behind them. Now, nobody had used the term manifest destiny in the 1800s. Most people believe that was coined in the 1840s, but it still really applies to what Lewis and Clark are doing. The idea we're going to expand across this continent to establish on earth the moral dignity and salvation of man. Now, it sounds really romantic. As we talk about our discrimination unit, we'll talk about just how cruel these settlers could be, these people could be, as they're pushing Native Americans aside in the name of progress. And so it's not all sunshine and roses, but the Lewis and Clark expedition really is. It's just an amazing story, an amazing adventure. Probably the closest we could come to this is comparing it to landing on the moon. And I think this is actually a little harder because when our guys landed on the moon, they had a map. They knew where they were landing, where they were going. These guys were drawing the map as they were going. So, like I said, I'll put a couple of videos up there. I encourage you if you're interested and learn a little bit more about Lewis and Clark.